rain, and temperatures won't fall far because of the extent of the clouds, so 9 or 10 degrees as we start off Wednesday. Nevertheless, a gloomy start, those outbreaks of rain trundling across the country, spilling into southeastern parts as the morning goes on. Then the skies brighten, the cloud lifts and bubbles up, and we'll see further heavy showers developing. This time the focus for heavy showers will be the Midlands into eastern and southeastern England. Brighter and drier further west and warmer for all of us. I think 19 for London there, 16 for parts of Glasgow into Newcastle as well. Heavy showers continue to spill southeastwards during Wednesday night, and then clear spells for many as we end the night. And actually Thursday looks like a mostly fine day. There will be some cloud and outbreaks of rain in the far north, but otherwise sunnier further south and warmer.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Today we'll be joined by polling guru Sir John Curtis to look ahead to Thursday's local elections. And we'll be talking to Labour's Barry Shearman about the state of Westminster and Ukraine. Plus, surrogacy. Would you carry a child for another couple? And my Real Me interview is with the Industry Minister, Lee Rowley. Good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister is addressing Ukraine's Parliament via video link today. Boris Johnson is the first world leader to address Ukraine's MPs since the Russian invasion began. He's going to say this is Ukraine's finest hour and that the UK is proud to be among their friends. The government are also going to announce a new £300 million package of defensive military aid for Ukraine and also send specialised civilian protection vehicles. Russia says it's hit a logistics centre near Ukraine's Odessa, a centre that is used to deliver foreign weapons. Meanwhile, more than 200 civilians are still holed up with fighters in the city of Mariupol's steel plant. The mayor there said around 100,000 civilians are still in the besieged southern city. It's currently being occupied by Russian forces. The research director at the European Expert Association, Maria Adiva, told GB News the evacuees have got a long way to go before reaching safety.
These people have not yet arrived to Zaporizhia, a city which is controlled by Ukrainian troops and which is the nearest, closest safe location. So they are still on their way. And the problem is that the territories through which they go on these buses are controlled by Russian troops.
The Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced a new wave of retaliatory sanctions against the West. The Kremlin said it's in response to what they're calling unfriendly actions from foreign states and international organisations. According to the decree, Russia will forbid the export of products and raw materials to people and entities it's sanctioned. Well, details of which countries and firms affected by the measures have not been provided. In some other news now, a leaked draft suggests the US Supreme Court will vote to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision that legalised abortion nationwide in America. The document obtained by the US news agency Politico shows that the Supreme Court would be inclined to uphold Mississippi's abortion ban. This is the first time a leak over a potential decision by the Supreme Court has been made public. The legislation changed in 1973 when the US Constitution gave the right to terminate a pregnancy. Post office workers are staging a one-day strike in a dispute over pay today. Members of the Communication Workers Union say the strike is over last year's pay freeze and the offer of a 2% increase from April this year. They say that is exceptionally poor. A post office spokesperson says the vast majority of branches are unaffected by today's strike and will remain open throughout the day. On the 15th anniversary of her disappearance, the parents of Madeleine McCann say it's essential they learn the truth of what happened to their daughter. Madeleine went missing from the family's holiday apartment in Portugal in 2007. Kate and Jerry McCann marked the anniversary of her disappearance online with a quote from Winnie the Pooh saying, "Even if we're apart, I'll always be with you." A life-saving test to spot a rare form of eye cancer in babies in the womb is going to be rolled out across the NHS for families who are at risk. It's a pre-birth blood test of the mother, and it identifies those with retinoblastoma. It's likely to identify around 50 cases each year in England. If the cancer is picked up early, it can often successfully then be treated, with more than 9 out of 10 children cured. Up to 40 activists from the climate group Just Stop Oil blockaded an oil terminal in Western Bartonshire this morning. It's their first action in Scotland, and protesters blocked the entrance of the Nudstar Clydebank facility and climbed on top of tankers. Others entered the terminal, sitting on pipes and silos to try to halt operations. Well, Police Scotland says officers are currently engaging with activists and will protect the rights of people who wish to peacefully protest. The activists are calling for an end to new oil and gas projects.
Scotland doesn't own any oil or gas. It doesn't bring any wealth to this country. And it's destroying the ecosystem now. It's actually stealing from future generations.
A parade of stars have celebrated American fashion at the annual Met Gala in New York. Well, this year's guests were told to dress in gilded glamour for the annual fundraiser for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The invitation-only Met Gala marks the opening of the annual fashion exhibition at the museum's Costume Institute. You're up to date now on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, lots of us will be heading to the polls on Thursday. We'll talk to polling guru Sir John Curtis about how it is looking for all the parties. The Prime Minister has addressed the Ukrainian Parliament. I'll be joined by Barry Sherman, Labour MP, on the significance of the address. We have a very special constituency surgery today. I will be joined by the Conservative MP Andrew Percy and his constituent Sarah Jones. They are campaigning together to make surrogacy laws easier. And my Real Me interview is with Minister for Industry, Lee Rowley. His dad was a milkman, but he made it to Oxford and into government. He's not a fan of cancel culture, describing pulling down statues as the rule of the mob. Local elections are just 2 days away for many of us. Here to make sense of what might or might not happen is the one, the only, Sir John Curtice, polling guru and Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University. It is always a pleasure to see you, John Curtice. Let's start broadly. In terms of seats, what constitutes a good night for the UK parties? Let's look at the Tories.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say to you, Gloria, is one, that the history of local elections is littered with failed attempts to try to anticipate the outcome in seats. And B, seats are a very poor measure of party performance in local elections, not least in this instance, because 40% of the seats in England are actually the result of contests in London, where, because of the way in which the electoral system operates in London, relatively small shifts of votes can result in quite substantial shifts of seats, because most wards elect 3 or 4 member councils. And then at the other end of the spectrum in Scotland, where there are also elections everywhere, it's a proportional voting system. So actually the seats don't transfer terribly much at all. So my best advice is actually don't focus too much on the seats, or at least certainly question them, because they're not going to be that good an indicator. There's also one other thing about these local elections, absolutely crucial to understand. These are local elections that are taking place disproportionately in the Labour parts of Britain. It's Scotland, SNP territory, but not Conservative territory. Wales, Labour territory. London, Labour territory. Outside of England, not all of it is voting. The Tory shires, for the most part, are not voting. It is the more urban and thus the more urban parts of England. And if you, for example, take England as a whole, Labour defending 2,200 seats, the Conservatives only 1,400. So it's very, very difficult for Labour to gain a lot of seats or for the Conservatives to lose a lot of seats, because already so many of the seats at stake are already in Labour's hands.
But still, come Friday and Saturday and Sunday, counting continues for a number of days. Is there any indicator that will tell us, well, it's been a good night for...
Yes. Yeah. There are 2 things you can do. The first is, first of all, just look at the local election vote tallies and compare them with what happened in the first instance last time. That's perfectly possible to do, so we can say whether or not in the typical ward the Conservative vote is up or down or whatever. And what then you do need to bear in mind is that in the baselines for these elections do differ. So in England, most of the seats that have been contested were last contested in 2018. 2018 was actually a relatively good year for Labour. It was Jeremy Corbyn's best local election performance. And the 2 parties were running it around neck and neck in the polls. So, therefore, bear in mind, we're not comparing local elections with December 2019, when the Tories were 12 points ahead. We're actually comparing with a very different situation. Scotland and Wales, actually, the last local elections were in 2017. So there, if you do the calculations, you're comparing it with 2017, which was a good Conservative year. So that's a complication. But the other thing you can do, certainly in England, including in London, is actually to compare the votes this year with the votes last year. And if you really want to get a measure of the extent to which the Conservatives' recent troubles, or indeed more broadly, the fact that Conservative support has been gradually been declining ever since the spring of last year, then actually that's the comparison you should make. Now, that's not the comparison that you will get out of seats gained or lost or council that are or are not controlled. But arguably, if you want a litmus test of the extent to which the Conservatives are now in greater political difficulty, indeed, frankly, in political difficulty for the first time in this Parliament, then that is the test that this local elections will primarily give you. You need to look at the right numbers, not to be dragged away by headlines that are potentially misleading.
That's really useful. Let's just do a quick canter across our nations. In Scotland, are we looking, where Labour have been in the doldrums and the SNP have reigned supreme, should we be looking for signs of a Labour revival? Are they vying for second place? Because the Conservatives, I understand, are currently the second place party.
Yeah, as we said earlier, in Scotland, the Tories are defending a very high baseline. It was their best local election result since 1982. And they went on in the 2017 general election to put in their best parliamentary performance for, I think, since 1983. So the Tories are defending a lot. But it so happens that in all the polls in Scotland since Christmas, i.e. since Partygate, the Conservatives have been running behind Labour in the polls. Now, this is not so much a sign of a Labour revival as, frankly, the Tories suffering a degree of implosion. And, you know, if Labour perform in line with the polls, there may only be a couple of points up on what they were in the Scottish Parliament election last year. And it will matter because it will mean that on the unionist side of the argument in Scotland, what hitherto has been a position whereby it's clear that the Conservatives were the largest of the unionist parties, albeit unionism is fragmented north of the border. And that's been the position since 2016. If Labour do come second, that will mean that the tensions within the unionist movement will be accentuated. And Labour was saying, well, hang on, now we're now the party that speaks for the union north of the border. But what you also have to look at is just how well do the SNP do. Now, actually, they didn't do that well in 2017. The result was rather disappointing. They ought to make gains, but the polls are uncertain about whether they will. But in the end, it's not whether Labour comes second that matters so far as Sir Keir Starmer's chances of getting overall majority concerned, because to do that, he will need to do well in London. It will be, do the Labour Party significantly close the gap on the SNP? Whether they're going to do that or not, I think is much less certain.
And in Wales and in England, obviously Labour did really, really badly with working class voters. That was the real decline. So should we be, in both those nations, Wales and England, we should be looking for signs of a red wall working class revival? Where should we look for those?
Yes, but it's difficult to spot them. Again, I'm sorry to disappoint you, Gloria, but these elections are more complicated than journalistic headlines would like to permit. So if we look at England, at least, so far as the red wall constituencies are concerned, well, either they're not having elections or they're only having 1/3 elections, and therefore it's impossible for, as a result, or very likely for control to change hands. That's typical of Dudley, for example, which the Conservatives were defending, or actually the Labour Party still control the council, even though they lost the parliamentary constituency. Well, one exception I can give you, but it's very much an exception, is Newcastle under Lyme. One of the seats that the Labour Party lost to the Tories for the first time since the 1930s. But the only reason why the Tories have control of this council is because of defections by independents in the autumn of last year. The Tories have never actually really controlled the council, and it so happens that it's a whole council election. Yes, in Wales, look at Flintshire, for example. That's an example of a Brexit-inclined area where Labour were losing ground in the general election. So we may well see signs in Wales, as we did last year, of Labour making gains. Otherwise, in England, apart from Newcastle under Lyme, well, I can find you a few places. Southampton, Labour might well pick up. But actually, probably, if Labour is going to make much in the way of a headline gain and the Tories a headline loss, it's not going to be in red wall areas. It's going to be in London, and it's going to be in some arch Thatcherite territory. Wandsworth, most likely, possibly Westminster. Places that the Tories have controlled for a very long time, and they've managed to retain control in years that Labour ought to pick them up, certainly Wandsworth, but have managed to retain control on the back of a very low council tax. So insofar as something might happen and there might be Tory losses, the Tory MP might make Tory MPs sit up and take notice. It's probably the capital that's going to deliver them, not those red wall constituencies.
Interesting. And just a final word, if you would, on Northern Ireland and what we're looking for there.
Well, frankly, it's the election of Northern Ireland is probably the most important, and it could well be the election of Northern Ireland that presents the Prime Minister with the biggest political headache. It looks as though, according to the polls, that certainly that the Democratic Unionists, the largest of the Unionist parties, is going to come second in this election, leaving Sinn Féin to come first, not because Sinn Féin are going to advance, looks like they're going to get roughly the 27% they got last time, but because of the fragmentation of the unionist vote, the DUP losing vote in part to the hardline traditional unionist voice, who certainly want the Northern Ireland Protocol gotten rid of. And it's the Northern Ireland Protocol that is dividing the unionist community. Others who are saying, well, actually, we're reasonably happy with the Northern Ireland Protocol, switching to the Northern Ireland Alliance, which may well come third. One poll suggests they may even be challenging for second. As a result of which, therefore, we may, for the first time, have a nationalist party as the largest party in Northern Ireland. And that means, under the rules of the Good Friday Agreement, it's Sinn Féin that get the position of First Minister, and the DUP would have to accept Deputy First Minister. But will they accept that position? Quite likely, perhaps not, therefore making it very difficult to form a Northern Ireland executive, basically impossible. Unless, perhaps, Boris Johnson decides to begin to abrogate some of the terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol. That, of course, might upset Sinn Féin, and they might say, well, we're not joining the administration and nominating a First Minister, given that's what's happened. And meanwhile, we might then be spiking a trade war with the European Union, who might retaliate by no longer keeping to some of the terms of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So, whichever way you look at it, Northern Ireland looks set to present the UK government with quite a substantial political headache.
Fascinating stuff as ever. Can't wait till Thursday, but that means that you and I are probably a bit sad. But no, we can't wait. Thank you, John Curtis. I will talk to veteran Labour MP Barry Sherman next about the culture at Westminster and the Prime Minister's speech in Ukraine. That is after a short break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Last week wasn't a good week for Parliament's reputation, with allegations of sexual harassment, misconduct, bullying, and even porn watching. Today, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has been the first world leader to address the Ukrainian Parliament. Joining me to cover the political stories of the day is the Labour MP for Huddersfield, Barry Sherman. Barry, good to see you.
Good morning. It's nice to be on again.
So I was looking, you're a very prolific tweeter, and I was reading your Twitter yesterday, and I saw one of your tweets caught my eye. What a mess Parliament has made of recent events which have tragically diverted attention away from the real evil of Vladimir Putin and the murderous criminal invasion of Ukraine, a proud democratic union. So, you must be relieved that today the Prime Minister became the first world leader to address the Ukrainian Parliament, and he's setting out details of an extra 300 million in extra support.
Yes, as you know, we've been shoulder to shoulder, the three parties actually, supporting all the actions against Putin's regime and the disgraceful, awful behaviour that they've conducted against this wonderful, resilient little democracy. So that has been, I think, we should be proud of the fact that all of us have stuck to that unity. But, I've been around, as you know, you very politely don't say I'm old, you say I'm mature, or you have another name for it.
Veteran.
But I've been around a long time. And, a lot of this furore around Parliament and sleaze, I think, is rather manipulated. I think that there was a concerted, slightly black ops operation from the Tories and some of the right-wing press to say, let's blow up this whole business. That could have been even the unfortunate business with someone looking at what he shouldn't be looking at in the chamber. That could have been done firmly, quietly, and discreetly, without it becoming, the front page news for about 5 days. But resurrecting the silly story about Keir having a beer after a by-election meeting, all that has been really, I think, to take the mind off Boris Johnson, his leadership, what's happening with this new Grey report that's going to come out soon, that's going to be pretty negative, and also what they're picking up, as I'm picking up in Huddersfield, which has 3 red wall seats near it, people not talking about local issues, but the quality of leadership that we are getting in this country from Boris and his Chancellor.
Well, let me just pick you up on one point that you made. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, said he didn't break COVID rules when he was drinking beer with a colleague last year. He insists he was working and he and his team only stopped for a break before resuming their duties. That's pretty much the same defence as Boris Johnson made.
No, it's not at all. You've been in the game, Gloria, so have I. He'd been at a fraught by-election. You always, at the end of a leader's or a leading front bench spokesman visit to a by-election, you come at the end. You go with a candidate, show great respect to a hard-working candidate, and say, "How's it going for you? What are we achieving? How do we?" And I remember that night because everyone knew the real problem in that by-election was turnout. How do you actually get people to come out and vote? And we all do that. And to have a beer as you finish a long, hard slog of a day, that ain't a party.
OK, I want to return to sleaze in Parliament. And I want to get your historical perspective, because you were elected in 1979. Every time I say that, I think that can't be right, but it is, isn't it? Has bad behaviour from members of Parliament got worse, or are MPs now being called out for it? It's always been there, but only now are we shining a light on it, or it's worse than ever? What do you reckon?
Funnily enough, it links into a question you were going to ask me at the last time I was on. Women coming into Parliament has really civilised Parliament. There's no doubt about that. 2 things: more women, more common sense, and also the fact that our hours. When I was a young MP, we voted every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 10 o'clock. And many of us 200 miles away from home and from our loved ones, a lot of people were tempted to go into the bars and drink, and just out of boredom of being away from home. Women coming into Parliament said these rules are silly. And of course, there's only one day of the week now we vote late. So I can't remember the last time I even looked in the Strangers Bar. And a couple of times I had when I looked in to see if one of my guests was in there or someone I wanted to have a quick word with, it's empty and dull and horrible. So the culture has really changed. I'm amazed that, the stories now, because compared to when I was a younger MP, it's dead as a doornail.
But still, I mean, the existence of bars and whether or not people go into them doesn't really explain people are being suspended for bullying, the member watching porn in the House of Commons. It's a bad look. Can we do anything to stop those things happening?
Yeah, it's look, 650 people in Parliament, and with 650 people, you are going to get, an element of you wouldn't really want there. But any organisation that big, and it's not only 650 MPs, it's nearly 1,000 members of the House of Lords, and it's about 3,000 staff. It's a big, vibrant sort of organisation when the House is sitting. So it is a very lively place and stressful place to work. And you would expect with 650 people, you're going to get some strange things happening, as you do in any organisation. And in Parliament, of course, these things very often do get blown out of proportion. I'm not saying that anything that anyone's done recently should be applauded or ignored, but the fact of the matter, put it in the context of so many people, so many employees, and of course you're going to have aberrations from what we all consider a good norm.
Got about 45 seconds left, Barry. Forgive me for asking you, do you know who Lorraine Kelly is? The Prime Minister's got himself in a bit of a pickle this morning over this question. Do you know who she is?
I have no idea who she is, but I'm usually kept online with this because, I've got 3 daughters, a son and 12 grandchildren. In fact, I was stunned the other day, Gloria, you'd like this, that something I said to the Chancellor recently has been viewed 3 million times on something called TikTok. So don't tell me or don't ask me these convoluted questions about someone I'm not quite sure about.
You've got something in common with the Prime Minister today. Barry Sherman, Labour MP for Huddersfield, always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Next, we're talking surrogacy with Andrew Percy MP and Sarah Jones. She's carried 5 babies for other people. And my Real Me interview is with Minister for Industry, Lee Rowley. His dad was a milkman, but he got to Oxford and now into government. That's after the news.
Good afternoon, it's 12:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Boris Johnson will become the first world leader to address Ukraine's parliament since the Russian invasion began. Today, he's telling MPs that this is Ukraine's finest hour and that the UK is proud to be among their friends. The government's announcing a new £300 million package of defensive military aid for Ukraine, and it's going to send specialised civilian protection vehicles. The government's being threatened with legal action over so-called unreasonable delays in processing hundreds of Ukrainian visa applications. Potential sponsors under the Homes for Ukraine scheme say it's putting refugees at risk. In the US, a leaked initial draft suggests that the Supreme Court will vote to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision that legalised abortion nationwide in America. The draft obtained by the US news agency Politico shows the Supreme Court would be inclined to uphold Mississippi's abortion ban. Post office workers are staging a one-day strike in a dispute over pay today. Members of the Communication Workers Union said the strike is over last year's pay freeze and the offer of a 2% increase from April this year. A post office spokesperson says the vast majority of branches are unaffected and will remain open across the day. A life-saving test to spot a rare form of eye cancer in babies in the womb is being rolled out across the NHS for families at risk. It's a non-invasive blood test of the mother and it identifies those with retinoblastoma. It's likely to identify around 50 cases each year in England. And a parade of stars have celebrated American fashion at the annual Met Gala in New York. This year's guests were told to dress in gilded glamour for the annual fundraiser for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You're up to date. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Gloria for the briefing.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, it's not something many of us would consider, to be pregnant and give birth to a child and then give that baby to another person. What an incredible gift, as long as it all goes well. Sarah Jones has been a surrogate no less than 5 times, and I'm delighted she joins me now, along with her MP, Andrew Percy. Welcome to you both. Lovely to see you, Sarah. I'm going to start with you. 5 times a surrogate. Wow. Tell me why you became a surrogate and tell me about the experience of being a surrogate.
OK, so I started being a surrogate 20 years ago. So my eldest surrogate baby is now 19. So they have been spread out over the last 20 years. And for me, it was a really easy choice to be a surrogate, because it was more a case of, why wouldn't I do this for somebody? You know, you can change somebody's life and create a family. So why wouldn't you do that? If you've got the ability to help somebody, then surely you should do that if you feel that you can. So for me, it wasn't a case of why would I do it? It was just, why wouldn't I? It was a really easy decision for me to make.
And just explain the current laws on how you go about it in this country, Sarah.
So the UK laws at the moment are very poor at the moment. So we have a trust-based, altruistic approach to surrogacy in the UK. So it's not commercial. Nobody can make any money from it, not surrogates or any agencies that help surrogates and intended parents to meet. And basically, there are no guarantees there for the intended parents going through surrogacy. So the surrogate baby is the in law, the mother of the child, and the surrogate's husband or wife or civil partner is automatically classed as the other parent of that child in law, regardless of genetics. So it puts surrogates at very great risk of being left with a baby that they're not genetically related to, that they didn't plan for or didn't want, essentially. So the law at the current moment is not fit for purpose, really. It doesn't really help anybody, least of all the child involved.
Really clear explanation, Sarah. Thank you very much. I'm going to bring Andrew, your Member of Parliament, in now. So normally when we do these constituency surgeries, the constituent has reached out to their MP because they need their help on something. But you and Sarah began working with each other not via that method. Tell us how.
It all happened a bit accidentally, really, because I'd watched a documentary about couples having to go to Mexico, and there were questions about the welfare of the women who put themselves forward to be surrogates. And I'd watched this documentary, and I think I'd put some parliamentary questions down, or I'd reached out to Surrogacy UK, who are the charity in this sector here in the UK. And then we connected. And then it turned out that Sarah, who was the chair at that time of Surrogacy UK, was actually one of my constituents, which is just
fortuitous.
I know, it was just like completely fortuitous. So then we all started working together, and we're trying to get obviously the law changed and updated. All of this legislation is from the 80s, when surrogacy was quite a new thing. So that's why we'd ended up working together. But it was just all really by accident that we ended up connecting.
And so what have you been able to do in your capacity as a Member of Parliament to change the laws that Sarah wants to get changed?
Well, we set up the all-party parliamentary group on surrogacy, which I'm chair of, and which the Surrogacy UK provide the secretariat for. So we then, through working together, we reached out to ministers, met with ministers, and then I like to think we played a small part in helping to get one of the health ministers to agree to the funding for a law commission study into a whole review of the legislation in this whole area. Lots of other people were pushing for that as well. So that's happened. The Law Commission will report and produce its draft piece of legislation at the end of this year, and then it's trying to keep the pressure up to get the parliamentary time. It's all got delayed through Brexit, through lots of general elections, as you'll remember. So we want this law updating, specifically really to deal with the issue Sarah raised there. These are people's genetic children. They're 100% the intended parents' genetic children very often, but those parents are not listed as the parents at birth and have to go through a court process. So the legislation's just outdated. It was a good stab at the time, but things have moved on. Families are created in all sorts of different ways. So we need this legislation updating.
Back to you, Sarah. Where next for the campaign as far as you're concerned?
Well, we definitely want the intended parents to be parents at birth. They should be the ones making the medical decisions for their children. They should be the ones allowed into NICU if there's any problems with the birth or anything. They should be the ones that should be allowed to register their babies and go on that sort of momentous first appointment to the registry office and get their baby's birth certificate. And surrogates overwhelmingly wanted that for them. So if we could get the parents to actually be legal parents at birth, it would be a great relief for the surrogates, and obviously be in the best interest of the child. So that's really what we're keeping our fingers crossed and hoping that the Law Commission will approve, I suppose.
Sarah, do you have any advice for anyone who's thinking of becoming a surrogate?
Yes, take your time. Do your research, become really informed. There's lots of Facebook groups, lots of websites that can help you with UK-specific information. But take your time, research, talk to your family about it, reach out to other surrogates. That's probably my best piece of advice, is talk to other surrogates before you do it. Surrogates will tell you the best way to do it. We're really quite protective of surrogacy in the UK. We don't want to see anything go wrong. So certainly take a year or so in just researching and getting informed and being really comfortable with that decision before you sort of meet anybody that you would like to help. So that would be my advice.
Really good advice. Andrew, final question to you. So you started being interested in this issue by watching a documentary, but just tell us what you have learned from people like Sarah, real people who you can chat to, who are your constituents, about this.
I mean, it's even better having a constituent who's, you know, has gone through this and done this so many times. I mean, I think the women who put themselves forward to be surrogates are incredible, you know, and it's done in a proper way in the UK. It's on a non-commercial basis, you know, so the care of the women is at the top of everyone's priority. And, you know, I think it's just absolutely brilliant that, you know, Sarah has helped people create families who may otherwise not have had children. So, look, it's just, I mean, it proves the power as well of how you can work together to really affect change. So, you know, I think that, you know, the surrogates in this country do such a great job in helping create families, and we want to make that environment even safer, make the legal position clearer, so we don't have a situation where people have had to hand babies over in NHS car parks because the technical parent isn't the intended parent. So, look, you know, I think, you know, and charity, it's one of those things, as you'll know from Parliament as well sometimes, like something that seems a bit of a niche issue. Actually, if you really get involved in it, you can really have an impact on. And, you know, the Surrogacy UK and all of the charities have done such a good job of raising the profile. And my job as an MP is now just to take all their good work and actually get the law changed.
And that's exactly why we do these constituency surgeries, to show why it can help people to get in touch with their MP to further their campaign and change the law even. Thank you so much for coming on the programme, to you, Sarah, and to Sarah's MP, Andrew Percy. Thank you. Now, it's time for my latest Real Me interview. I spoke to Industry Minister Lee Rowley. His dad was a milkman. He made it to Oxford and then to Parliament. He's not a fan of cancel culture, describing pulling down statues as the rule of the mob. Lee Rowley, the son of a milkman who makes his way to Oxford. Tell me about that journey.
Well, a bit of an unexpected journey, to be honest. So I grew up in Chesterfield and went to normal primary and junior school, went to a good state school, which my mum and dad got me into. And my history teacher, when I was 15, 16, said, have a go. And I did. I never expected to get there. And the first kid from my family to go to university straight from school. And when I rocked up there in October 1999, it was quite a change. But I was really privileged to go. And it's taught me a lot about life and has given me a lot of opportunities, which is brilliant.
You know, so I was the first in my family to go to university, but I went to what was Birmingham Poly. But even going there, I felt very, very out of place. I felt like, I mean, I'd never really met anyone that'd been to private school before. I mean, I used to cry all the time in my first term. Were you a bit more resilient than me?
No, I got there. I remember the first day that I got there, and they gave me this tiny little room, and my dad dropped me off, and we put stuff in the room, and then we were supposed to go down for drinks. And I was walking into a room who I knew nobody, and I just wasn't prepared for that. I didn't have the skill set to do that, so I stayed in my room and watched whatever was on at the time, Hollyoaks or whatever, and it took quite a while to get into it. I'm not really sure I ever properly got into my college at Lincoln, who I had a great time with, but in terms of the social side, never properly did it. But you learn these things, you can't. I think I probably walked around Oxford with quite a big chip on my shoulder for a few years because everybody seemed to be doing it so well and I didn't get it. But it's taught me an awful lot, and I was very proud to be able to do it.
Did you ever help your dad out on the milk round?
Every day. Every day. From the age of it's a sort of slight child labour from the age of about 8 or 9. Because my mum was learning to become a teacher. She was an adult teacher. So my dad was basically the guy who looked after us, me and my brother, whilst we were growing up. So at the very least, we'd be sat in the van whilst he was delivering milk in the mornings. And then when we went to secondary school, it was on the other side of town. So we used to do an hour and a half getting there every day. So I used to deliver milk as I was going to school. And then on a Saturday, it used to be 5 a.m. in the morning as pocket money. So when I was in sixth form, I used to earn 20 quid or whatever it was for getting out on the Saturday, and I go and spend it on Saturday night down in Chesterfield.
So, as you said, you were born and raised in Chesterfield. Both your grandfathers were miners at the pits in the area. The well, all the pits have gone now, but the particular pits that your grandfathers worked at, Westhorpe and Shirebrook collieries, both were closed under Conservative governments in the 80s and 90s. When did you become a Conservative with that sort of backdrop which scarred communities like the one that you grew up in?
Yeah, I come from a pretty Labour family, actually. I mean, we're not that political, but the only politics we've done outside of me is Labour. My aunt used to work for Arthur Scargill during the miners' strike, the NUM.
Really?
Yeah, and she went out and campaigned for Tony Benn in the '84 by-election in Chesterfield next door and things like that. And I think Mum and Dad are very non-political, and my mum thinks I'm slightly crazy to do this as a job. I remember when I got selected, she said, "Why do you want to do this? You've got a good job. Why do you want to do this?" But they're very good to me, and they help me out a little bit. My mum volunteers in my constituency office and things, and so that's brilliant. But I somewhere in the late 90s, I'm a total child of the 90s in terms of that time when we were optimistic and we had so many options and the world looked as though it was going in the right direction. And somewhere there, I got interested in politics. And the thing that sort of was a incongruity to me was that the world seemed to be getting better, but my part of the world, North Derbyshire, where I grew up, there was just a lot of people, big names, people who were, Dennis Skinner, Tony Benn, from a particular tradition. And they, as a kid, I just watched them and they said a lot, but they didn't really seem to do a lot. And I remember going down to see Tony Benn as a sixth former in Parliament, first time I ever went to Parliament. And he did it again. He sort of said a lot, and I wasn't sure what he was doing. I've got a great deal of respect for him and what he achieved, and the same with Dennis Skinner and things like that. But I always wanted to be somebody who did stuff. And then somehow that got me into the Conservatives. And then 16 years later, I got elected, and here I am. You're a junior minister. Do you enjoy that? I do. It has its moments, but I really, really enjoy it. I think as somebody who wants to do things for my constituency, and then whatever I can do to contribute to the wider discussion as a whole in the country, it's a great opportunity to do it. I'd like to be able to do more, go faster, all the things that you get, but it's an opportunity to try the values which I think North Derbyshire have given me, and which I think are the values which I think the country won't be perfect under, but I think the country would thrive under and would be successful under. They're the kind of things which I try to implement every day with imperfect success. Has there been anything that has particularly surprised you, which you didn't expect to find about the workings of government when you became a minister? I was a councillor before. I know it's different, but I'd sort of gone through the processes of how organisations work and how government makes change and all of those kind of things, but at a local level and now at a national level. It's, I don't know if anything was that surprising having watched it for a few years. It's about working out where you can pull levers, because if the objective is to do things, you've got to know how to pull the lever to get things done. You're openly gay. Tell me about when you came out. I think I'm a pretty black or white person, and I realised who I liked, who I loved at a pretty early age. And then I just before I went to university, I said, to myself, I need to, be true to who I am. And so I just started telling people, and then it sort of went from there. I never really talk about it because it's not a big part of my political approach. I mean, it's important. You can hear me slightly struggling to find the words in it almost. But there's a lot of the gay community who just get on with stuff, who just don't necessarily need to talk about it every 5 minutes. And I think I'm one of those. I'm very proud of who I am. I'm proud of who I love. Proud of what I've been able to achieve in some small way. But ultimately, in politics, the other stuff is the thing I went into politics for, the ideas, the values, the trying to change the constituency and beyond. Have you ever encountered homophobia, either at university, in your community, or in politics? Never in North Derbyshire. And that is because we are warm, open, tolerant, inclusive. Of course, there's people who are silly, but there's nothing you can do about it. But I don't look for it. I think there's a tendency over the past few years where people are starting to look for grievance. They're starting to look for problems. I mean, life is full of things which don't work out, where there are problems, where there are issues, where there's even unfairness. And you should try and work on those. But I don't think you can build a society, I don't think you can build your life on grievance, on things that haven't worked for you, on things that have been unfair to you. You've just got to say, well, if that guy said that thing or that thing, well, fine, but tomorrow's a new day and let's get on with it. I mean, I've been very privileged in that there's not been a huge amount of problem there, but even the small problems I've had, I just think you just go, right, fine, what's the next thing that we do? Because you just got to keep going.
So I was looking at some of the things that you said in Parliament, and during that whole debate on statues, don't worry, unless you want to, we're not going to talk about statues. You said in that debate that everyone who was a campaigner or everyone who had a view on something, stop cancelling your opponent.
Yeah.
Just explain a bit more about why you said that and what you meant by it and how worried you are that we are cancelling our opponents.
Well, I'm really worried about it. I mean, I was reading an article in The Guardian last night, and this article was all about how this person had a piece of political literature through her door, and it shouldn't have been allowed because it said something about gay marriage. People don't like gay marriage. That's up to them. I mean, I'm not asking them to get gay marriage. It's just let people. I believe in that kind of Voltairean notion of you can say what you want, absolutely what you want, as long as it doesn't incite violence. And you have a responsibility not to use words in a way that upset or cause problems and things like that. But that's a reflection of you if you choose to do that, rather than you shouldn't be allowed to do it. And I try to be really careful with my words. And I wish people would spend more time thinking about the care they need to take with words than trying to stop other people saying things. Because it's not like they change what they're thinking. They just get more annoyed because they can't say it. Let them say it and then point out how ludicrous it is. I mean, that would be a lot more logical to me than just trying to ban people from saying stuff. And it doesn't work. It won't move our community, our society on if we don't engage with people and say, you're not being rational, you're not being reasonable, this doesn't work because of this, this and this. And that's why the statues thing just really infuriated me, because it's basically rule of the mob. It's basically a group of people saying, I'm telling you you're not allowed to say this, or I'm telling you you're not allowed, this thing isn't allowed to be here, and there's no due process, and ultimately if you replace one set of arbitrary things, which are silly statements or statements which shouldn't be made, with another set of arbitrary things, which is, I'm telling you you can't do that, or I'm going to pull this thing down, they're sort of as bad as each other. So say what you like, but be ready to be ridiculed about it.
I suppose some people would say, in order, if you have a cause, or if you feel that your community has been wronged systematically, then sometimes you take extreme action. I'm trying to think about what they would say in response to that. Do you get that?
Well, I mean, I'm a Tory politician, aren't I? So I've chosen to work in the system. So I think you can get greater change in the system than screaming at the system. Otherwise, I would be on a protest march right now, like a lot of the political tradition that my part of the world came from. And I'm really pleased that North Derbyshire has seen that there's an opportunity to try and influence things within the system rather than without the system. But a lot of that discussion starts from a principle of grievance and starts from a principle of power. And I just don't see the world in a kind of zero-sum game that if you have power, it stops me from doing things, or if I have it, I'm going to try and oppress you. The life's not like that. The overwhelming majority of people are open, welcome, tolerant, nice, want everybody to get on. And if we start from that principle, rather than seeing these kind of strange patterns in the background about how you're trying to stop me doing something or I'm trying to stop the reverse, and then we throw all these words around in accusation, if we actually moved away from that, we'd probably get more done.
Lee Rowley. That was the perfect real me. I've learned so much about you, because even though we were colleagues briefly, I actually didn't know that much about you. So thank you for telling us your story.
Thank you.
You can watch all my Real Me interviews on our YouTube channel, or catch them on the Real Me podcast. Listen on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Just search for GB News. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. I'm back every Monday to Thursday from noon. Liam Halligan will bring you On the Money next, but for now, it's time for your weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Another generally cloudy day today with some rain or showers, but brighter skies will make their way through for southern areas at least, with a few sunny spells, although that could just spark a few more showers. Weather fronts coming along later to give more general cloud and rain, but ahead of those fronts, well, it's a gloomy picture, particularly for central and northern parts of the UK. A lot of low cloud covering the hills of Wales, northern England, Scotland, and some outbreaks of mainly light rain and drizzle in these parts. Further south, though, some brighter spells emerging, especially southwest England, South Wales. However, some heavy showers also starting to develop as the afternoon progresses. 17 for Cardiff, for Southampton, but cooler for the east coast, 11 to 13 here. And we keep the generally cloudy skies overnight. Any heavy showers tend to disappear for a time before outbreaks of sporadic rain push into Northern Ireland and then spread into Scotland, northern and eventually central England, as well as parts of Wales. But there'll be some dry spells in between the rain, and temperatures won't fall far because of the extent of the clouds, so 9 or 10 degrees as we start off Wednesday. Nevertheless, a gloomy start, those outbreaks of rain trundling across the country, spilling into southeastern parts as the morning goes on. Then the skies brighten, the cloud lifts and bubbles up, and we'll see